I'm so happy to be back here at Furality for a second year. If you don't know me, I'm PaperFen. I've been a VR chat avatar creator for 4 years, and I'm the creator of the Moontail Basin species. I've just finished up my second year of college studying game art design to learn how to do game artwork professionally. And today, I'm going to take you on another crash course through some more advanced parts of avatar making. Last year, I covered all the basics, down to tools and buttons within Blender, all the way to adding a model into Unity. So if you're completely new to this, I highly recommend watching my panel from last year too. I'll be revisiting a few topics with some additions, corrections, or just some speedy refreshers, but in general, this is a slightly more advanced crash course. I've learned even more from this past year, and I want to share all that with you guys. If you want to learn more after this, please join my Discord through my card or pop into my finally returning after basically a year's hiatus Twitch streams. If you see me during the con, don't be shy. Despite the weird jaw, I don't bite. For starters, let's do a nice in-depth overview of good topology. Topology is what we call the arrangements of points on a 3D surface. It's made out of polygons, which can either be tris, quads, or n-gons. Tris are triangles, quads are squares, and n-gons are everything else. You typically don't want n-gons on a model. They don't work well when rigged and often lead to lighting errors. Quads are optimal because when using them, you can get really nice clean loops around the model, and they function best when it comes to movement and lighting. Tris are fine, but they can also sometimes be weird with lighting, so use them sparingly. For VR chat, you don't need to have all quads topology, since having a low poly count for good performance is much more important. Good topology takes time to learn and master, so remember that it doesn't need to be perfect on your first model. Keep in mind that when making your model, you want to make it with the mouth open. This makes it easier to make the teeth and tongue. You can close it later. First, let's start with the face. Facial topology is very important, and it's the most complicated area of the mesh. To get a really expressive model, it's ideal to have your topology laid out properly. Facial expressions and movements will look kind of crunchy if you don't have enough polys in the right spots, but you can also go overboard and add too many points in areas that don't require it, leading to a higher poly count than you need. It's a balancing act. The best practice is to have loops around the eyes and the mouth that each make a full circle. Try not to have long, winding loops that make multiple spirals around the mesh. Those get really messy and they don't move properly. Plus, they can be a real nightmare to manage when trying to select a specific loop. Around the eye loops, you want to make a mask-like shape that goes over the bridge of the nose and the forehead and sits right between the eye loops and mouth loops. It's generally good to have at least one loop of quads between your eye and mouth rings. That way, your mouth movements don't affect your eyes and vice versa. With any part of topology, cleanup, or retopology, it's important to have references, but it's most important for the face. Look up examples of facial topology that have these colored areas highlighting important loops like these. These are great guides to use while learning. Most of the examples are going to be on humanoid faces, but don't panic if you want to make a model with a muzzle. I would honestly consider making an animal muzzle to be slightly easier than making a human mouth and nose, because human noses are just kind of stupidly intricate. For a muzzle, the loops of the bridge of the nose are probably going to want to come all the way across until you reach the upper lip, unless you want to do an extra detailed nose. Remember to keep a good amount of topology on the side of the muzzle too, as you'll want to be able to lift the lips and sneer the nose. Above the forehead itself, you'll want less topology, since it isn't going to move nearly as much. Now, here's quite the puzzle. How does one go from high to low poly cleanly without using tris? By using what are called terminations. This is when we reduce the amount of points in some areas, or terminate and reduce a certain amount of loops. Here are some common termination patterns to get familiar with. Honestly, this is one of the hardest parts of learning good topology. It takes a lot of practice to get an eye for where terminations should be and where to make them. Putting terminations in areas of high movement will result in some crunch. Tris are in general just more easy to understand. I mean, why would you make a weird square pattern when you can just use a triangle and get it over with? But with some practice and pattern studying, it gets a lot easier and can be very, very satisfying. I find that keeping the ears and the fluff disconnected from the head model itself is helpful in many ways. Firstly, it's easier to keep the model clean. Needing to hand sew two pieces of mesh together to keep the topology clean is like pulling teeth, especially if one of those objects is going to be highly mobile, like ears. Secondly, when you connect the ears to the head, it's harder to make the weight of the ear bone not deform your skull. I used to sew my ears directly into my head mesh, and anytime the ears would move, it would look like it was giving my avatar a major concussion. Finally, it's better for base editors. A lot of people buy bases to kit bash them with other bases they also like, or add things that are entirely new. So if you have pieces that can be hot swapped out with others, it's a lot easier for people to work with than having them hard modeled onto the surface. From the face, we move on to the torso. There are two ways to do torso topology. First, the easy way, is to pretty much just make a tube of loops that goes all the way down to the hips. This method works perfectly well and is the quickest way to do it. However, if you're going to want to make a torso that has boobs, you're not going to want to just have angular boobs that are pushed out of what is essentially a cylinder that's molded to a human form. You should instead make a section of loops that go around the chest and round it out. And if you want a body that can really change weight and size, you're going to want to have a fair bit of loops around the belly. It's really good to follow the shape and muscles of a human form while making good topology, as it gives you the flexibility of adding more shape to the model. From my experience, I started out with just simple straight loops all the way down, and then I added a bunch of quads over areas that I wanted to be able to change shape. Now with loops around those areas, I'm able to add a lot more detail to the torso. This method does have a higher poly cost, but in my opinion, it's totally worth it when making a base model that will be able to change body shape. But if your model doesn't need to be able to change shape on a dime, the cylinder method is probably better for you. A lot of modeling comes down to what do I need for this specific instance, and not what do I need to do because a book told me to. The shoulders and hips are some of the more complicated areas, as they are highly mobile parts of the body, not by blend shapes but by bones. For the shoulders, it's a good idea to have a round set of loops around them that mimic the deltoid and trapezius muscles. The loops around the hips should be pulled up high on the outside. You're going to kind of want to make the shape of a pair of underwear. Think of how your own hips and thighs move. When you raise your leg, your crotch and stomach don't move with it. Having this underwear-esque shape will assist in that and make it easier to make more natural-looking leg movements. The crotch should also have more loops than you think it will need. Not only can our legs move up and down, but they can also move in and out. If you don't have enough loops supporting the crotch, this outward leg movement will make it look really crunchy, or give what I call credit card crotch, which is where the model has such a sharp angle between the legs to deal with that it just ends up looking like a hard line, like a credit card swiper. Areas like the knees, elbows, and heels should have a circle of loops around them so that when they bend, they retain their original form as best as possible. For the lower arm, I like to twist the loops that go long ways around down the arm in the same direction as our radius and ulna. Remember, when you stand at a T-pose with your palms downwards, your lower arm bones twist around each other, which you are now uncomfortably aware of. That way, when your arm untwists, it looks a little bit more natural whenever you put the topology from here all the way here to the inner part of the wrist. Of course, you can also just make a straight line of loops down the arm if the twisting is a little bit too complicated. In addition, this twist can sometimes make the wrists in particular look a little bit crunchy if the angle of that the quads are at is too harsh and there aren't enough loops running down the arm. Legs don't need this twist since the tibia and fibula don't rotate nearly as much, unless you can somehow turn your feet all the way backwards. Hands and feet are pretty much just complicated tubes with more tubes coming off of them. For hands, the fingers should have either rounded areas around the joints or extra loops to aid in bending. Take a look at your own fingers. When you bend them, there's a section underneath each joint that bunches together, kind of like a triangular shape. We can apply this to our topology as well, creating terminations on the side of the finger so that you have fewer points at the bottom and more on the top. However, also just using a straight line of loops in a simple tube shape is just as functional for VRChat. The palm is then a hub for all the fingers to connect to. Usually, I leave the arms and hands disconnected while I make them. This is to make sure that I can match up the number of points around the arm with the ones around the wrist. If you find that you have too many points around your hand, make some terminations on the back of the hand, as it isn't going to move as much as the palm. Now, feet paws are honestly one of the most annoying parts of making a model, in my opinion. I would recommend looking at different videos and images of how other creators make their feet paws. Here's 2 good examples that I found of others and how I make mine, with the inner part of the paw overlapping one another to create nice round beans. You can either merge the beans and claws into the mesh or keep them separated. Depends on what works best for you. Don't worry if you don't get them right the first time. Legs and feet are honestly really hard. Finally, we come to the booty and the tail. The butt of your model should have a good amount of topology since you'll want the legs to be able to bend without influencing the size of your dump truck. The tail can either be hard modeled into the body like how mine is, or you can keep it separated to have the trunk of it hidden within the mesh of the body. Once again, for base making, having a tail that's disconnected makes it easier for people to swap out the tail with others that they might like, which increases customizability. As you can see, knowing how the muscles and body work knowing how the muscles of the body work and are located is a really good tool to have when you want to create super high quality topology. Honestly, the best practice that I had was an assignment in college where we were tasked with sculpting a really buff human as accurately as we could. It taught me where all of the different muscle groups are, and I apply that knowledge to my topology. So I really recommend doing a similar exercise. It's helpful in modeling, rigging, and even 2D art. But remember, your topology doesn't need to be perfect the first time. Here, this is what my first ever 2 models looked like. Crunchy as all get out. But little me was doing the best, creating something that I loved, and so will you. This model was the best that I could possibly make at the time, and that's all that matters. I still love and appreciate both of these models because they were my starting point. Judge your creations based on your skill level, not the skill level of others. And that just about covers what good topology looks like, but how do you actually go about making it? Well, you can either build it up naturally through box or edge modeling, or you can make a sculpt and retopologize it. Boo, get scared, get scared! For a lot of people, that word is just as scary as job application. But I'm gonna let you in on a sneaky little secret. It's I really love topology. It gets me into a flow state. It's like a calming puzzle. It's certainly a long process, though. It sometimes takes multiple days of work to complete a full retopology project. The best way to retopologize something is to use a tool called RetopOflow. This is an add-on that's free through GitHub and paid through the Blender market. I wouldn't recommend retopologizing without it, honestly. It's just so useful that it feels natural. Basically, when retopologizing, you need to make sure that the new mesh snaps to the surface of the old scoped mesh. RetopOflow does that automatically with tools that allow you to make loops and easily slide points into place and smooth them out. Behind me is a little demo of the different tools that it adds. It's gorgeous. Honestly, it's just beautiful. Just remember to hit Control-S to save when in the RetopOflow menu, especially if you're using an old dusty version of Blender like me. I once didn't save before exiting the menu, and, well, I lost like an hour of work that I was really proud of. But yeah, this tool makes retopology a lot less scary. Once you have a mesh that is low enough poly for VRChat, it's time to start placing your rig. Let's refresh what I talked about last year. A humanoid VRChat avatar requires the following bones: hips, spine, and chest through the torso. An upper chest is optional. Your arms need to have shoulders, upper arms, lower arms, hands, thumbs, index, middle, ring, and little fingers. Your legs need to have the upper legs, lower legs, and feet bones. A toe bone is optional, but it's still good to have. And when I refer to a toe bone in the singular, I'm referring to a single toe root bone that holds all of the individual toes. Finally, the head area needs a neck, head bone, 2 eye bones, and optionally a jawbone. I always give my models a jawbone so that I can easily close their mouth when I'm done making the inside of it. I also use it to make lip sync shape keys. Once in Unity, the jawbone will need to be removed from the rig configurations. Your bones also need to be in the correct order, or else Unity won't like it. A parent bone is one that holds all of the others. Child bones are the ones that move in cooperation with the parent. So, for instance, the upper leg is the parent to the lower leg, foot, and toes, but the foot is the only parent to the toes. Every bone beneath the upper leg will move when it does. The upper leg and all the other bones are parented to the hip, and all the bones together are stored in an armature. To create your bones, go to Add, Armature, and Single Bone. This first bone will be your hip bone. Before we edit our new armature, let's go look into the orange Data Properties tab under the viewport display and check In Front. Now your bones will always be in view, even when they're within the mesh. Then go into Edit mode. Move that bone to the hip. To make more bones in a chain, click on the bone, press E, and then move the new bone where you want it to be. You can press Z to lock your movement to the Z axis. That'll make sure that your bones are perfectly within a vertical line. You'll add your spine, chest, neck, and head bones next. Remember to name them in the green bone tab, or else I will personally come haunt you. Then, you'll make your arm and leg bones. But notice, you need to have a gap between where the chest bone ends and where the shoulder begins. So you press Shift-D to duplicate a bone. Put it into position for the shoulder, then select the shoulder bone first, and then the chest bone by holding Shift as you select it. Right-click, hit Parent, Make, and then Keep Offset. But now, you only have one shoulder. So click it, duplicate it, and move it to the other side. Name the first one left shoulder or shoulder underscore L, and the second one right shoulder or shoulder underscore R, or vice versa, depending on which you did first. Turn on symmetry mode, and then move the bone that's in its correct position ever so slightly. The other will automatically snap into the right place. And now, as you make more arm bones, they'll automatically show up on the other side. The same principle can be applied to the leg bones. Remember to name them accordingly as you go along, always with underscore L or underscore R to mark them. For now, put a pin in making the eye bones. I'm going to cover that a little bit later. To make fizz bones for the tails or ears, I recommend using a chain of at least 3 bones to achieve a nice flowy look. For anything that doesn't need to flow, such as toes, I only add 1 bone. Keep in mind that Quest has a fizz bone limit of 64 bones, and this includes end bones. End bones get automatically added to an exported FBX by default. Quickly open the export menu and click on FBX. Under the armature section, there's a checkmark that says Add Leaf Bones. Make sure you choose to not add those, or else you'll accidentally end up doubling your fizzbone count. Once you have the bones set up, the next step is to rig or weight paint them so they actually control the movement of your mesh. I went over this last year too, but this is one of the most intimidating steps, so we're doing a detailed refresher. For this step, I recommend having Cat's Blender plugin installed. I literally only use this tool to easily jump in and out of pose mode as it resets the pose every time, and to make visemes, aka lip sync shape keys. There honestly might be another tool that does this, but this is just how I've been doing it this whole time. You can find this plugin on GitHub, but to my understanding, this is no longer the official version as it's not being updated anymore. To begin rigging, select your armature and your model at the same time. Make sure your armature is yellow. Yellow is what the parent will be. Then right-click, hit Parent, and Automatic Weights. Your model has now been moved beneath your armature. This means that it's parented to it. Now click on the green Object Data Properties tab on your model. It has what are called vertex groups. Vertex groups are basically like tags for specific vertices of your mesh. With the automatic weights option, your model automatically gets assigned vertex groups that match your armature's bones, and weights to go along with them. Now select both your armature and your model again, but this time the model needs to be the yellow one. Now, enter weight paint mode. Your mesh will turn blue. Shift-click on any bone to enter that bone's vertex group. Red means that a bone has full control over that area. The automatic weights option honestly does a really good job at defining a humanoid rig, but it's going to need some touching up here and there. The two most important tools are the draw and the blur. Draw is how you draw on weights. You can change the weight it will set the drawn area to. 1 is full control and 0 is no control or blue. The blur tool is how you soften the weight distribution between your bones if your model is pinching oddly. Another good tool is the gradient tool. You can click and drag it in a direction and it will make a gradient effect, either erasing or adding more weighting. I like to use this to make sure that areas that aren't supposed to be weighted aren't, since it sweeps over the entire mesh. Another tool is the smear tool. This is good for when you need to just nudge a little bit of weights into one direction. Under the options menu, there's also something called auto normalize. This option makes sure that there is always a value of 1 across the entire model. This is really good for when you're painting things like fur, where the automatic weights option isn't going to work properly. It can also help you make sure that there aren't any areas with little to no weighting, which can lead to smearing. However, it can also sometimes cause some errors. Since it's always trying to make sure that the model is fully painted when you use the blur tool, it can sometimes make some weird artifacts. Finally, there's a way to add masks. Turn on the Paint Mask button and select the Select Box tool. You can either click to add faces directly to the mask or press L to select everything that's connected. Then you can hide anything that's selected with H, hide anything unselected with Shift-H, and unhide it all with Alt-H. You'll have to exit the mask selection mode to change which bone you're focusing on. Now that you know how to use the weight paint tools, let's quickly see what the automatic weights look like, and oh goodness. Using the Cat's Blender plugin I talked about earlier, enter the pose mode from the toolbar. It's a great starting place, even if it's a little terrifying. But just looking at this demo, everything here needs work. The arms twist way too much in the middle, causing pinching. The legs pinch underneath the knee, the shoulders pull the armpit up way too much, and the jaw and ears are just completely out of whack. If you want to focus on a specific area, you can set the pose in pose mode, then switch back to object mode, and then back into weight paint mode. You'll be able to paint while seeing how it affects the focus movement in real time. This process is a lot of trial and error. Paint a little bit, see how it moves, and if it doesn't move right, keep touching it up until it does. It's time for a water break for the Fen. The Fen has drank water. Okay, eye bones. Creating eye bones can be a bit of a pain. They need to be perfectly at the rotation point of the eyes so that your eyes don't wobble around inside your head. So here's how you get the perfect eye bone location every time. To prepare, go to wherever your eyes are. If they're already part of the same mesh as the rest of your body, select them, right-click, and hit Separate by Selection. Then hide the body and everything else in your scene so we're just focused on the eyes. If your eyes are perfect spheres, or even spheres with flat surfaces as the iris, well, you've got the easiest method. In edit mode, separate the right and left eyes just how you separated them from the body. Then in object mode, simply choose one of the two eyes, hit Object, Set Origin, and then Center of Mass. Next, have your eye selected and press Shift-H, then Cursor to Selected or Cursor to Active. This is how you move your cursor. You can snap things to it easily, and in this instance, you'll be snapping the eye bones to it. In your armature, make two bones, IL and IR. Now click on one eye bone, press Shift-S again, and hit Selection to Cursor. If only the head point moves, you'll need to make sure that the tail is directly above it. You want to do this by copying the X and Y positions of the head point to the tail point. You can do this under the green bone tab where you named your bones. Also in this tab, make sure that the roll of the eyes is set to 0. Otherwise, your eye bones will rotate at weird increments within Unity. Then in object mode again, select both of the eyes, right-click, and hit Join. Once your eyes are joined, hit Object, Apply, and then All Transforms. This will reset your eye's origin point back to the origin of the world. This is important because otherwise you won't be able to mirror the weight of the eye bones. Make it so that the eye bones are 100% weighted to their respective eyes and nothing else. Also make sure that there are no other bones like the head, neck, or jaw that have any control over the eyes, lest your eyes become squishy like jello. I also always add what are called eye caps to my model. This is an inner black ring that circles the eye socket. Because I flattened the iris and pupil of my eyes, without this black piece, I find that it just looks wrong to be able to see the fur through the corner of my eye. This is just a personal preference thing, to be honest, but you can make one really easily by duplicating the inner ring of the eye socket and extruding the walls out once. Now, if your eyes are flat planes, your job is a little bit harder. With your eyes separated from any other meshes, add a UV sphere in object mode. You'll need to align this sphere with the curvature of where you want your eyes to move. Don't be afraid to make this sphere whatever size and position it needs to be. The bones might even need to be on opposite sides from the actual mesh itself. Once the sphere lines up with how you want the eye planes to rotate, you're going to want to do the same process as the spherical eyes, but on this UV sphere. Set the origin to the center of its mass, snap the cursor to its origin, and then snap the eye bones to that point. Weigh the eye bones, there we go. Weigh your eyes to the bones and test it in pose mode, and to make sure that your eyes are rotating on the proper path without any clipping, and then you're done. However, it is very important to keep in mind that this method requires a little bit of extra setup whenever you get into Unity. Because this method often leaves you with eye bones that are really far away, these eyes are incredibly sensitive to rotation in comparison to spherical ones. In preparation for the Unity setup, make sure to add ghost eye bones that are not weighted to anything but are right behind the eye planes themselves. I'm going to cover this on the Unity side later, so hang tight, we're not there yet. Now that we've covered some rigging, it's time to cover shape keys. Last year I went over how to make lip sync shape keys with a little bit of help from the Cat's Blender plugin. So let's look at something a little bit different, a blink shape. Blinking keys on avatars with large eyes can sometimes be a little bit difficult. Since the shape key moves from 0 to 100 in a linear movement, it can't account for the curvature of the eye. So you need to make sure that when your eye closes, it isn't going to clip through the eyeball on its way down. To do this, I push out the eyelid further than you'd expect it needs to go when closed. I also utilize massive eyelashes to cover the overlapping part of the eyelid. Your eyelashes don't need to be nearly as big as mine, but I recommend adding some level of a lash line. Besides just hiding the separation between the eyelids, it also alleviates the struggle of needing your shape keys to accompany your texture and not smear your lash line. If you just texture on a black line for your lashes, when the mesh stretches to close the eyelids, this line might end up smearing to high hell. I also find it much easier to make my models do some very extreme expressions with a physical mesh and being used as the lashes, such as this very, very upsetty spaghetti expression. Something like this just isn't possible without a physical mesh. To make your shape keys, go to the Shape Keys tab under the green Object Data Properties tab. I'm currently utilizing an add-on called Shape Keys Plus to help organize my shapes, but the process is exactly the same for the default Shape Keys manager. Click on the plus button twice so you have a basis key and an empty one. Rename that new key to Blink, and then enter Edit mode. Move your mesh into whatever you want this key to look like. Make sure to not change the basis, as that is your mesh's default position. Use a proportional editing button to help move points smoothly into place. You can also use Sculpt mode to assist in making shapes, but remember that Sculpt mode doesn't leave you with a perfectly symmetrical mesh, so you'll have to hit Snap to Symmetry in Edit mode when you're done. Once you've made a blink shape that blinks both eyes, you should also go ahead and make one for each individual eye blink. Our eyes don't have to blink in sync, so you should also give your avatar this ability too. Make two new shape keys, Blink L and Blink R. Select one half of your model, go to that side's corresponding blink, and hit Ctrl V to copy a blend shape. Choose the blink that we've made before, and uncheck Add to make sure that it copies the shape 1-to-1. Do that with the opposite size blink, and then you're done. Keep in mind that you can copy shape keys or parts of shape keys around. This is really handy if your shapes ever get asymmetrical, or if your asymmetrical keys get mirrored. If a shape that's been mirrored overlaps in the middle vertex, you'll need to copy 50% of the full shape to one side's middle vertices and 50% to the other. That way, when the two meet in the middle, it makes a full normal shape and doesn't stretch too far. Next, I'm going to cover UVs. To my shock, a lot of people actually really don't like making UVs. Personally, I love it. Again, it's something I find akin to a puzzle, and I love puzzles. I said this last year, but I still think it's a really good analogy. The UV of a model is basically its sewing pattern. Think about how the sewing pattern of a fursuit is made, if you've ever seen videos of those. You put duct tape all around it and draw out where you're going to cut. When you cut the tape apart, the pieces will lie flat, so you can use them as a template for how to cut apart your fabric. The duct tape is the UV, the lines and scissors are your seams, and the fabric is the texture. Seams are red edges that mark where your UV is to be split. You can mark seams in edit mode by selecting your lines, right-clicking, and selecting Mark Seam. You can also do a neat little trick to be able to mirror your seams. Select one seam, go to Select, Similar, and then Seam. Once all of your seams are selected, go to Select again, and then choose Select Mirror. Then you can mark all of them as seam again. When selecting the mirror parts of your mesh, you can also turn on Extended, which will keep your original selection selected, and will also select the mirror. And now both selection and seam no longer sound like real words. Now, heed my warning. Do not ever, ever, ever use the Smart UV option. I know that it seems like a hassle to have to cut the seams into your model and manually make your UVs, but I promise you it will be worth it. The Smart UV option will automatically cut apart your model, yes, but it also makes a ton of tiny little islands that are impossible to texture properly. And you'll also inevitably get overlaps. So just save yourself the trouble and do it the right way on your first time, please. On to how to make UVs properly. Navigate to the UV Editing tab. You'll see a new window pop up called the UV Editor. If you don't have it, you can always change your windows by clicking the button in the top left corner and choosing any from the list. You can also add extra windows by right-clicking on the top bar and clicking either vertical or horizontal split. Now that we're in the right window, we can start. Individual parts of the UV pattern are called islands. These islands need to be far enough away that the textures won't bleed into each other, but close enough that you can have a really high-res texture. A small UV island means it has less pixel space, which increases the blurriness. You can check the size of your islands and how they'll look with a texture with something called a UV grid. Click on Add Image and then change the type to UV Grid to add one. You can also show a heat map of texture distribution to see where high and low levels of pixel density are. Generally, the bluer the better. And you can turn on something called Sync Selection, which does exactly what it says. It syncs the selection between the 3D view and your UV view. This can be really helpful when organizing your islands. The way that I mark my seams is to first make a cut all the way down the center of the model. That way, the UVs can be perfectly mirrored. I make loops around parts like the shoulders, wrists, hips, tails, ankles, neck, and so on. On parts that are more tube-shaped, such as the arms, I'll make one cut lengthwise. If you make two seams running down one arm, you'll end up with two islands for one arm. This will function, but it can be a little bit confusing for someone else using your textures. But with only one seam, you'll have one island per arm. The trick is to use the least amount of cuts to get the least amount of islands, but to keep them as flat as you possibly can. And when you make a good amount of progress, you can create your UVs in edit mode by hitting the UV button and pressing Unwrap. A drop-down will pop up where you can easily change the margin of your islands. You can also, of course, manually move them around, and I like to organize them so that they correspond with the left and right sides of my model. But that's just me. You don't have to do that. Applying all transforms is a small but very, very important step. It's best practice to have everything on your model scaled at 1 and the location and rotation set to 0. Your mesh, your bones, everything. This makes your life a lot easier if you later want to add extra assets to your avatar, and it won't mess up any locomotion animations in VRChat. In object mode, simply select everything and go to Object, Apply, and then All Transforms. In addition to doing that, don't be lazy like me and decide that you later want to scale something in Unity just a little bit and then leave it at something like, I don't know, 1.2 or something. No. Take it back into Blender, scale it to whatever you want it to be, apply all the transforms, and then take it back into Unity. Learn from my mistakes, because that was a big one. It seems very small and inconsequential, but I promise you, if you're lazy, it will come back to bite you. Once all is done and made and you're ready to export, you'll need to export your model as an FBX. Firstly, rename your main mesh to body and merge any of the pieces together. VRChat doesn't like to have to deal with multiple rigged meshes, so merge as many as you can. To make sure you export it properly, here's a few settings I'll go over. Firstly, you can check a box to limit your export to selected objects only. This is always good in Blender files where you have things that you don't want to export yet. It will only export the things you have selected, so always double check that you have all of the necessary things selected. Next, make sure to turn on Apply Scalings to FBX All. This makes sure that in Unity, your scale is at 1 instead of 100. I already mentioned leaf bones, but I'll say it again. Make sure to uncheck adding leaf bones. It's under the Armature tab. Right under the Armature tab is the option to bake animations. This is how you'll export any animations that you decide to make in Blender within your FBX. I went over how to make hand animations last year, so if you want to see that, go find my panel from last year on Furality's YouTube channel. To save these settings, click the plus button at the top and add a new operator preset. Then anytime you want to export, just click on the preset you made. Be sure to save your FBX in a place where you'll remember it's located and then export it. Blender's export settings aren't the only thing that's important. Unity's import settings are too. I'm going to expect that you have Unity set up with the VRChat SDK, but if you don't know how to do that, there are a bunch of tutorials that you can follow that make the process as painless as possible. In Unity, all you need to do to add an FBX is to drag and drop it into the Assets folder, which is the bottom window. Click on the FBX. On the right side is the inspector. This is where you set the import settings. Firstly, turn on read/write. Next is a little correction that I made from last year. For me, I found that the best settings for the FBX's normals, goodness gracious, are to turn legacy blend shape normals to off. Can you tell that this is confusing stuff? And then set both normals and blend shape normals to import. And I always just change the smoothing angle to 90. Basically, what this means is that the normals, aka how the model calculates shadows and such, are imported. This will also save any custom normals that you do in Blender to smooth out any fur. These settings will also keep your FBX's file size right in between the other two settings I'm going to talk about. If you set legacy blend shape normals to on and the normals to calculate, it will accurately keep the shadows on blend shapes, but it will not retain any custom normals. The top example showing the heel fluff shows that. This will also jack up your model's size, which is bad for optimization. The last option is to keep legacy blend shape normals on, set the normals to import. This keeps your custom normals, but will completely ruin the normals on body changing blend shapes. You can see an example of that behind me. This setting also leaves you with the smallest FBX size, so if you're really strapped for space on something like a quest upload, you can turn this on. Questies just won't see proper shadows on any blend shapes. But if you don't have any body altering blend shapes, you might as well use this setting set and take advantage of the small size. Next, move to the Rig tab and set the animation type to humanoid. Hit Apply and then Configure. This is where you'll change the bones and muscle settings. Check to make sure all the correct bones are in their place, and under Head, remove the jaw, if you have one, by clicking into it and hitting the Delete key. On an avatar with visemes, you don't want the jaw to be controlled by a bone, you want it to be controlled by your shape keys. Under the muscle settings, you can control how far certain bones will move. I make my models with a digitigrade rig setup, so I use this to restrict any movement of the lower leg into the thigh. I also use these settings to change how the fingers move. Paws don't need to move nearly as much as human fingers do in order to close all the way, so I limit the value of each finger's stretch to about half of its original. This is especially helpful if you don't have custom finger animations. If you made any animations in Blender, you can get them out of your FBX by selecting them and pressing Ctrl-D to duplicate them. For any animations that move parts of the humanoid skeleton, you must do this after applying the rig. For anything like tails and ears that aren't part of the humanoid skeleton, you must do this before applying the rig. Now, to add the FBX to a scene, just drag it from the Assets folder into the left-hand panel. This is the hierarchy. Click on your model and press Add Component on the right. Search for the VRChat avatar descriptor and add it. Change the eye height to right between your model's eyes. This is where your eyes will be when you're wearing the avatar. The exact placement can get a little bit finicky, so mess around with it until it feels right. Under the lip sync, press Auto Detect. As long as your body mesh is named Body and your visemes have the right names, it will detect them automatically. Otherwise, you'll need to manually input them. Under Eye Look, press Enable. Enter your eye bones and then press Preview on the rotation states. Remember to keep your eyes roll at 0 and keep them straight up and down in Blender, or else you're going to have a hell of a time trying to fiddle with these values. Just below the eye rotation states are the eyelids. This is where our blink shapes will go. You can also add eyelid movements with shape keys when you look up or down. Below the eye states are the playable layers. This is where you can add custom animations. The two most important ones are FX and gesture. Hand animations will go into the gesture layer, and expressions and basically everything else will go under FX. To get these layers working, you'll also need a menu and a parameters list. I'm not going to cover this because, honestly, I think this is one of the most covered topics in VRChat tutorials, so here's a bunch that helped me. There's a lot you can do with the animation controllers, but they are pretty confusing. Even still, it's best to learn how to do things manually before using tools like VRC Fury that will help make toggles and such automatically. When I first started in Unity, I worked for hours trying to get animation controllers to work. And when I couldn't, I just went to bed crying. So be kind to yourself as you learn. It's very hard, but it does get better, I promise. Now, what happens if you have your mesh imported, your settings perfected, but you need to change something about the FBX? Trust me, that sort of thing is going to happen a lot. To perfect my FBXs, I probably have to re-import them into Unity over 100 times. Thankfully, it's actually really easy. Find the FBX you want to replace, right-click it, and hit Show in Explorer. This will show you exactly where that file is within your Unity save. See the meta file? That's where your import settings are stored. In another File Explorer tab, open up where you saved your FBX. Make sure that they both have the exact same name. Drag it into the Unity version and hold Control to copy a file. Alternatively, you can right-click to copy a file and right-click again to paste it. It will ask you if you want to replace the file, and we do, so hit Yes. This will replace the actual FBX itself, but it won't touch your import settings. That's pretty neat, huh? Now, if you've changed any of the bones around, you'll have to go into the avatar editor again, hit configure, reset pose, and then enforce T-pose, or else Unity's gonna throw a hissy fit. When you're gonna be re-importing your mesh a lot, it's a good idea to keep your FBX bundled together as a prefab. This keeps it connected to the original FBX because it knows, hey, I'm a version of that thing. You can tell that something is a prefab when it's labeled in blue. Anything that's been added to it will be labeled in white. Your model will be able to remember its bone's original position when it's saved as a prefab of its FBX. If you see a bone that's been moved from that original position, you can click on it, find the property that's been changed, it's marked in blue, right-click, and hit revert. As a prefab, you can also change the prefab it's linked to. This is handy if you have multiple versions of the same FBX. To do this, you duplicate the model in the hierarchy. Look under the inspector on it, and you'll see where it says prefab and then whatever the name of your FBX is. Click on the FBX to go to it. On this model, I have two different FBXs with two different jaws. To change the version, just drag and drop the other FBX into the prefabs area and hit replace and keep overrides. And then boom, all the things like fizz bones that have been added to the model have been kept the same. Now, I'm going to show off a neat but advanced trick. Take a look at my antenna. I have two versions of these, one short and one long. I need to be able to swap between the two by scaling the bones. But if they're controlled by the same bones, then that would be impossible. They would both scale at the same time. So each antenna actually has its own chain of bones that they're rigged to. They move completely independently of each other. But if I try to turn all of those into fizz bones, then that would significantly add to my fizz bone count. And 64 is a small limit when you've got a tail as big as mine. What we can do is we can create ghost bones. These are bones that have no weights over anything at all, but will still be affected by physics. In the case of my antenna, I have a chain of antenna bones that match up perfectly to the position of the ones that actually control the movement. These ghost bones are then used by the VRC fizz bone component, and then each corresponding bone on the real antenna chain uses constraints. A constraint is when one bone follows either the other's position, rotation, or scale of another bone. There are a few other types of constraints too, but those aren't important right now. With rotation and scale constraints, both chains will move at the same time, with the same physics, and can be affected by scale animations on the fizzbone chain. However, I can also independently scale the root bones to the antenna chains to hide or show either type. Here's another example of the same trick but used in a different way. I've got 4 toe bones that I want to move around on each foot, but now I have too many fizz bones and that won't be Quest compatible. In addition, you can only put 1 root bone into 1 fizzbone component, and you have a limit of 8 fizzbone components on Quest. So, ghost bones to the rescue again. I duplicated the normal toe bones and kept them in the exact location as the real bones. For this demonstration, they're separated. This includes the toe root, which will help me keep the left and right toes separated. Remember, these ghost bones have no weights over anything at all. But instead of rooting these ghost bones to the feet, I root them to their own parent called Toes Fizz Quest. Now I can put all of these bones into 1 fizzbone component. However, that's still too many bones. So we can tell the component to ignore some of them. Since we only have 1 bone in the chain, we also need to set an endpoint value. This is a very small number that tells the fizzbones how long it needs to be. Now, there are 2 fizzbones that will move independently around on each foot. Then we go into the real toe bones and rotation and constrain them to follow the movements of the ghost bones. However, we run into an issue. Because the root of the ghost bones is connected to the hip, these bones don't follow the feet, and thus the colliders will get really messed up in VRChat. So we need to add a parent constraint to the left and right roots of the toe bones and constrain them to the real left and right toes. This means that the ghost bones will now follow the movement of the real toes. And finally, you have to make sure that is animated is checked on the fizzbone. I forgot to check it and spent a whole 2 days trying to figure out why the darn thing wasn't working. 1 checkmark can really ruin your workflow, let me tell you. So now that you know about constraints, I can finish off explaining how flat eyes work. Remember how I told you to add ghost bones to around where it would make sense for the eyes to be? Well, now we're going to use those. Rotation constrain your real eye bones to the ghost ones with a weight of anything lower than 0.2. It doesn't need to be a very high number. Then, in the VRChat avatar descriptor, change the eye bones to the ghost bones. That way, when VRChat tries to figure out where your eyes should be looking, it's more accurate. Once you've got a VRChat avatar descriptor on a model, you're basically good to upload it. Open up the VRChat SDK control panel and log in. Name your avatar, give it a thumbnail, and watch it go. I always do my initial testing in desktop mode. Getting in and out of a headset either on Quest or PC is a hassle and a half, so it's best to do all early and technical testing on desktop. Worlds that I like to go to test out my avies are MMD worlds. These are worlds that have preset dances. That way you can watch out for funky movements and wait, while also having fun by getting to see your creation dance. I also really love the Avatar Studio, which lets you take nice pictures and preset poses. Another great thing to have is Gogo Loco. This is basically a standard addition to most avatars you'll see. It lets you do different locomotion animations, which is good for checking out specific poses in higher detail. You can add this really easily through the VRChat Creator Companion. You'll also need something called VRC Fury to get it to work. This is a tool that's so robust and insane, it's basically just magic. Once Gogo Loco and VRC Fury are in your Unity save, just add the Gogo preset and you're good to re-upload. If your avatar isn't linking to the one you already have uploaded, don't worry, you can always go into the Content tab and copy the blueprint ID of the Avi and paste it back into the blueprint section to reconnect it. I mentioned that I use MMD for testing. Well, I'm also a really big advocate for MMD shapes being on all avatars. These are blend shapes that MMD animations use to animate the face. They need to be properly named with their respective Japanese characters, but most are just copies or variants of shapes that you'll probably want to make anyway, like winks, sad faces, angry, and more. This is the full MMD facial expressions chart. You can find it on DeviantArt under the same name with a text list of all the characters for easy copy and paste access. Also, with MMD shapes added, it's really easy to get really nice expressive work in progress pictures without needing full body. Just snap a bunch of pics as your avatar dances and find the ones you like most. And there we go! That's all that I could fit into this amount of time, but there's still a lot that I didn't cover. If you want to learn more, I'm always open for questions. I'll answer them to the best of my ability, and if I can't, I'll try to find someone else who can. I want there to be more avatar creators. It's such a fun community, and it's just an amazing way to express yourself and bring your art and characters to life. I'll be around for the whole Furality, and I'll be at the dealer stand meets as much as I can be. Find me at booth 1118, and if you could, please check out my Moontail base. I just updated it to V2, and I'm very, very proud of it. If you have any questions right now, I am open for them until our time is up.
Hi, I'm here to read out some questions from the Discord. If you would like to ask some questions, you can do so in the Furality Discord channel. The first question that we have is from Wolf Luciana. What would be the best way to stop being scared of Blender? P.S. Love your work.
The best way to stop being scared of Blender is, I would say, honestly, just dive headfirst into it. Just try to make anything that you like. It doesn't have to be good. It doesn't have to be game ready. It can just literally be anything. Whenever I first started making my models, the first thing that I did was I just tried to make just a simple head of one of my characters, and that's literally all that I did. And even just doing that taught me so much. So yeah, just dive right into it. You don't need donut tutorials. You don't need those.
Awesome. Next question is from Red Roses. Do you have any tips for creating smooth shape keys, specifically for blinking or visemes? And what would be the best thing for someone who is new to Scratch work to practice making?
So to make nice, smooth shape keys, honestly, I really like to use sculpt mode whenever I make certain shape keys. For blinks, I don't necessarily do that. I just use the proportional editing because it's a lot harder with sculpt mode to get into like those tiny little details. But sculpt mode is a really good way to like change a lot about a mesh. And also there's the smooth option, the smooth tool, that is very, very helpful for smoothing things out. What was the second half of the question?
What would be the best thing for someone who's new to Scratch work to practice making?
Oh yeah. Again, anything that you want to, really. Anything that's gonna bring you joy specifically, because if you're having fun, that is literally the best that you can possibly do. Just focus on trying to have fun, and that's like half the battle, really.
Next question is from someone called Pygo. Do you use data transfer in Blender on Fluff? Could you go over driver in Blender versus Unity?
I do use the data transfer to like blur in my fluff. I don't have enough time to go over it because it's very in depth, But there are a ton of tutorials on how to do that. And I also mentioned the import settings that are best for if you have fluff that has been data transferred. And again, what was the second part of the question?
Could you go over driver in Blender versus Unity?
Driver in Blender versus Unity. I'll be honest, I'm not 100% sure what that means. I'm so sorry.
Next one is from Shohei. I am curious, what was the inspiration that led you to creating the moontail, and how long did it take to finish the model?
Oh boy. So this is actually a species that's been around ever since I was like in very early high school. The inspiration was basically just, hey, what if I took this other creature that I made and put on some funky antenna on it and also split its jaw in half? That'd be really cool, right? And then boom, they existed. And then years and years later, I decided, hey, that would actually be kind of cool to make a base of. Gosh, the first like V1 for this avatar, I would say probably took around 6 months, because I know that the V2 specifically took like 6 months to make, and then because I was in college, it took like a whole year technically, but 6 months of work. But yeah, making a base avatar takes a really, really long time, honestly. Yeah.
Next one is from KC3577. How can I prevent Unity from doubling the face count during model import due to the replacement of 4-point faces with 3-point faces?
Ooh, that is. Ooh. You can triangulate it. In Blender, you can. Oh my gosh, what is the hotkey for it? I think it's like Control T or something like that. You can like triangulate something before you export it. I know that will lower the file size, because Unity does automatically triangulate things, and I think so does Substance Painter also. So automatically triangulating things before you export them can be really helpful.
Narka is asking, I am going to be making my own avatar of my own species from scratch after Furality. Do you have any tips for me and others you haven't mentioned? Also, if you update a model, how important is it to keep the UV the same / backwards compatible with the previous version? Also, thank you so much for inspiring me to get into avatar creation. Love the moontail.
I'm so happy for you. That's awesome. Oh my gosh, I'm really excited. You should totally join my Discord and show me, because I would love to see it. First part of the question was tips and such on how to like make a base. Yes.
Any tips you have for me and others you haven't mentioned yet?
Honestly, I've mentioned a lot of the things that I wanted to talk about. For base making specifically, I would say that UVs are really important. And also labeling your UVs, because there's a lot of people who don't have access to like 3D texture editors, so that they will texture things in a 2D view instead. So having a layout of your UVs that is labeled is really, really good if you're going to sell a model. Another part of the question was?
I think that's the last one that we have time for. So, okay. How important is it to keep the UV the same / backwards compatible with the previous versions?
So, honestly, pretty important. But if you're going to be changing the entire mesh, like the V2 of this avatar is completely different from the V1. So the UVs are absolutely completely different, and people just have to deal with it, because at the end of the day, it's my creation and it's your creation, and do what you want, basically.
Awesome. I think that's all we have for the Q&A.
Eevee!
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, thank you for having us as well.